All right, everybody. This is Jamie Hope on Signed, Sealed, Delivered. And today I have one of my favorite people. He's a mentor of mine. He's an accomplished screenwriter, he's an author. He works currently as an editor at Discovery Channel. And do you still work on the show that you were working on before? So if you do, we'll have to talk a little bit about it because everybody loves that show you worked on. And this is Sean Paul Murphy. Thanks for coming on my show, Sean.
And thank you, Jamie, for having me. You're one of my favorite people too. And
Aw,
you were very helpful. You were one of the first people to read my upcoming novel, Chapel Street, which
yes.
which was inspired by my real life haunting experience. It's a gross exaggeration of it, but
Well, I know a lot about that already too, and it does seem to be, I mean, regardless, it's terrifying. So, we want to talk, we're definitely talking about that today because it seems like this is something that is becoming more prevalent, and you're seeing a lot of shows that are documenting this. Some are sensationalized, some are more documentary and true to form, but tell us about your experience on, is it 21 Helen Street or St. Helen Street?
21 St. Helens Street. Now,
Yes.
it's not actually the real address. It actually was the real address of the house here in Northeast Baltimore, but when the house was built in 1915, but during the 1920s, the street name was changed and the house number was changed. But there's another family living there now, so I'm only referring to it as the old address to let them maintain their privacy.
Sure, absolutely. So, how old were you when you moved into this house? And tell us a little bit about your family.
Well, I was at the time there were mother and father. My mother was a housewife at the time. My father worked for Social Security Administration. Um, there were five kids at that time. There were three boys and two girls, and I was the second oldest boy. Though my brother didn't beat me by much. He's only 10 months older than me. That,
Irish twins.
that's right, Irish twins. And we lived at 5507 Hamlet Avenue here in the Hamilton area of Northeast Baltimore, where I'm speaking from now. I've always lived within a mile and a half to 2 miles of where I've always lived.
Oh, wow. You
I,
you must you must like the area. You must feel like it's home to you probably, huh?
well, it seems if you don't move after a while, it seems like it's cowardly. But when you stay long enough, there's a really you get this really weird sense of intimacy with the place that's
Sure.
totally familiar with it.
Absolutely. And describe the house you moved in. So you had several
I was
siblings.
13, yeah. So I had four siblings at the time. We moved in 1974 when I was 13 years old, and it was a tremendous. We had a small three-bedroom house, and my parents had the master bedroom. My three brothers and I had the second largest bedroom. My two sisters were kind of stuck in a closet, essentially.
Oh,
That house went up on sale a couple years ago, and I went and looked at it, and my sister's bedroom was being used as a storage closet. So
oh wow.
they, had, they couldn't even have a door open in it because it would take up too much room to swing it. So
Wow.
a very small room. So when we
Mhm.
moved into this house, which at the time had five bedrooms, and it was a very large house, and my sister said it was like moving into a castle,
I
and
bet.
really fabulous. It had like shutters, and it had this big wraparound porch, and it had lots of stained glass. It had like a
Ooh.
dual stairway where you could walk up from the foyer into this up to the second floor, or from the dining room up, and there was a landing before you went up to the actual second floor. And the landing was where apparently the previous owner died. She had
Wow. Did you guys know that before you moved in?
not before we moved in, but everybody in the neighborhood told us that she had fallen down the steps and died on that platform. And the mailman noticed that the mail wasn't there, and you could see from the front door of that platform. And apparently, the mailman saw her.
Wow.
Now there's considerable debate because I went as I was researching the house for these blogs. I got her death certificate, and it said she died at a nearby hospital. But I was at a funeral, a neighborhood funeral recently, and there were a lot of people who were neighbors of that house who were old enough to remember her and remembered when she died, and they're like, nope, she died in the house. She died.
That's weird. I wonder why they would have it listed as maybe they just didn't pronounce her dead until they got to the hospital.
That's my mother's guess, is that they didn't pronounce her dead until she got
Yeah.
to the hospital.
Okay.
But because everyone was saying, no, she died on the stairs. So,
Ah,
good. And she's
wow.
such an old lady. And she was only 74. Now,
Oh, the older I get, the more that sounds very young. I remember when a relative of mine died, she was 55 and I was 13, and I thought, well, at least she lived a good long life. And now I'm like, oh, that's mortifying. She was so young.
I was talking to one of my neighbors who knew her as when she was a child, and she said, the weird thing is, I'm older now than she was when I first met her. And she seemed so,
Oh, geez, that's crazy.
you know.
So so tell me a little bit about when you noticed on your end, when did the hauntings or the things that you suspected that there was something other than normal occurrences going on? How old were you? How long after you moved in?
Well, I'm the wrong person to talk to because I didn't have any real experience until 10 years in.
Oh,
Yeah,
wow.
my sisters. Well, originally we were all still continuing to sleep in 3 bedrooms on the second floor. My mother slept in what I call front east. My mother and father. The 3 boys slept in. No, she slept in front west, front east, and my two sisters were rewarded for their years of suffering by being given the master bedroom, which had this big closet. Of course, when we moved in, little did you know that the big closet was actually the center of the haunting of the house. So they got
Oh.
they got the worst room in the house.
Oh no. So they got punished again.
They got,
Jeez.
and my brother and my older brother and I moved up to the attic. There were 2 bedrooms there. He had the front room, which we now call, was soon to be called the hell room or the hell hole, and I got this large back room that had a beautiful view of the city.
So
And
you were how old? You said you were 13 when you moved in?
yeah, and I was in my
And did you ever feel weird? Did you ever just get the creeps for you know what I mean? Like sometimes you would get that even as a kid, like if you're running up the stairs and it's a normal house. Did you ever feel that way before the occurrences happened?
not until afterwards.
Okay.
You know, well, I will say that the older of my 2 sisters, who's now passed, she killed herself, and that's one of the reasons I'm writing this book well, it's not a book, it's a series of blogs.
Sure.
It's because I had 2 siblings kill themselves, and my
That's
mother
awful.
asked me before I wrote Chapel Street, my upcoming novel, whether I felt that the entity in the house could have been responsible in part for their deaths. And my book Chapel Street was sort of a first answer to that. Now it was a way for me fictionally to deal with the issues. And now
Sure.
through these blogs, I'm hitting it directly head on. But my older sister claimed she saw something the first day. I didn't realize it at the time. My
Okay.
younger sister, my older sister is still, I'm the older of my 2 sisters, I should say.
Hmm.
And because she's not here to speak right now, we
Yeah.
don't know what else she saw. But my younger sister had very intense experiences from the first year on. My younger brother, who was born in the house, he doesn't remember a time when it wasn't there. It's hard for him to pick out when the first thing was, but its
Hmm.
presence was always there. And
Now, one thing that you do mention before we move on, what I find interesting is none of you talk to each other about your hauntings when you live there, correct?
that is correct.
And so it wasn't until later, after you guys moved out, that you all start. Is that correct?
Well, here's the situation. I consider there are 2 phases. The first phase was where it was centered on the second floor, master bedroom, but the other rooms too. And people will tell you that the entire house, is definitely occupied. But around 1985, my mother's best friend, this guy Ted, who was later her boss, Ted Talbert. Ooh, maybe I shouldn't have mentioned his last name. It's okay, he's not listening. His aunt died, and
Mm.
he wanted to communicate with her, so he got a Ouija board,
Ooh.
and he took it over to our house, and my mother took it up to the front attic bedroom, which we call the hell hole now, the hell room, and they tried to communicate on the Ouija board there.
That is a bad situation.
That is an extremely bad situation. And at that point, that's when I became aware of the haunting, and it was very intense. It's sort of like, you know, more manifesting itself. It was like haunting of Hill House or Poltergeist.
Wow, it was that bad. So tell me about your first occurrence that you knew when you were like, okay, something's wrong here.
Well, let me go back. Sorry, I know it's confusing. Let me go back.
No, that's okay.
You read my first book, The Promise or the Pros and Cons of
Yes.
God. How I nearly killed myself, but
Yes.
miraculously spared. You know, it's funny because I hadn't put it together even when I wrote that book. But at that chapter, when I'm talking about my attempted suicide attempt, which was like 83, that even now looking back, it was totally inexplicable. You know, there was
Wow.
reason for me to feel suicidal and to act.
Was it a prolonged depression, or did it just kind of come on fast and then?
I was in an unsteady relationship, but
Okay.
the relationship was on the upswing, so it shouldn't have happened.
Sure.
And in my book, I said it was sort of like a sudden, complete emotional, psychological, and spiritual breakdown. And now I look back on it, and I'm like, it was definitely the entity. It saw me in weakness and came after me.
Do you think that was what caused your brother and sister problems as well?
Well, once, now we're jumping way ahead, but
Okay, I'll let you back up and tell your story. I know you probably have like a thought in your head of how.
There was that suicide attempt. And,
okay.
So after the Ouija board incident, usually, well, I wouldn't say usually because everyone's experience is different. Usually in hauntings, you'll start with, and it's not really a haunting because that says ghost. This is not a ghost situation. I'm not sure I believe in ghosts, but I definitely believe in this entity or entities.
Sure.
And it was like footsteps. That's the first thing a number of people say they heard at the house were footsteps, and or moving furniture are the two things. And I was hearing I was on the top floor. I was hearing footsteps on the roof. First, it sounded like squirrels scurrying about.
Oh.
But I would be sleeping, and they would be scurrying about while I was sleeping. I mean, not sleeping, but I was listening to them. But anytime I opened my eyes, they would stop.
That's creepy.
And it would start to move. And, I could hear it enough that I could tell. It's like in my mind, I was following it, like where they were walking. Mm-hmm. And there was like a tree, and I'm still trying to figure out whether the branches actually extended, a big oak tree, over towards the roof. I don't think they did, but that's the rational explanation. It has to be a squirrel. But after a while, it's human footsteps on the roof.
Before all this happened, where were you on the haunting scale? Were you more of a skeptic, or were you someone that fully believed in it? Some people are, every little noise they hear is, it's a ghost. Or were you more skeptical?
I was definitely skeptical. In fact, I would say that the only haunting I ever believed in was the one we experienced.
Okay.
I'm very much from Missouri when it comes to haunting. Since I started this series of blogs, I'm much more open to other people's experiences. So it started as footsteps. I mean, it started as like animal footsteps, and then it was like human footsteps. And once again, it would stop when I would open my eyes, and I was not asleep because I would close them just to see if they'd start again, and they would. So whatever it was, the sound, and there was a little cubby hole above my attic, and I would like go up there with a flashlight and look out. It was too small to get into, but I would look around.
Haven't you seen movies? You're not supposed to go and see what's making the noise, at least not alone.
It was maddening, and it would keep you up, And then the thing that really became me conscious that this was actually really something is there was, and I say in my blog it was 3 nights, but I think it was actually 5. I woke up, I don't sleepwalk, but I woke up climbing out of my window, the third story. It's a very long drop off the back of our house.
How close were you to like going out?
Well, there's a roof out there, but it's a flat roof with a slope. So, but I would like hit my head or something going out. And the thing is now, once that's weird. Twice it's weird. But the thing was, it was always literally at 3 a.m. I would look at my clock.
That is the most prevalent. You could call it the witching hour. I know that a lot of cultures believe, and even biblically, that that's when the veil is thinnest between like the spirit realm. It's called the fourth watch. That's where the veil is thinnest between like our world and the spirit realm. I don't know why, but the Bible actually I think addresses it. They call it the fourth watch.
Yeah, and
Tell her my theory about the 3 o'clock.
my wife has a theory about the 3 o'clock. Why don't you stick your head in here real quick?
Sure, tell me.
Well, biblically, Christ was probably died at 3 o'clock.
No, that's the afternoon.
The afternoon. But the
Yes.
opposite of that would be the 3 of 3.
Yes,
So,
that's a good.
Yeah.
Theological.
Okay.
It's like the opposite of that's, Satan always does mock God and everything he does. He's a cheap imitator. At least that's what you see with different things he has done. Like, even when they talk about in the Revelation, he has, we have the Father, the Son, and the Holy Spirit. Well, he's going to have himself, which he would be considered the Father. Then he's going to have the Antichrist, which is supposed to be his son, and then the false prophet, which would be like, a religious figure. So it makes sense.
I'm not going to name which religious figure, but continue. Sorry. It's always good. My wife always has good thoughts.
Yeah, I love her. She's great.
Yeah. And, it's really kind of weird and cliche, which made me less likely to speak about it, that it was at 3 a.m. But at that point, I really turned myself to prayer, which was not necessarily effective at first. And, you get the bed shaking. But what was even weirder was I had like a twin bed, a narrow bed.
Mm-hmm.
It was an old wood. It was an old wooden frame and like a thin mattress, but you would feel like a large snake inside the mattress. It would like
What?
it would be like you were trying to sleep on top of a snake. And
No.
there were many a night I would pull the mattress off the bed. And then I would in the next morning, I would be looking to see if there were any holes in the mattress, which is just insane because it's like anything that big, a snake that big would have been like 25 feet long.
Right.
So there would be no hole in the mattress.
Right.
And how would a 25-foot snake get into my room at night and do it?
You definitely were skeptical.
Yeah. Now, I mean, every night these mad things were happening, and when the day came, you would think you were crazy. You were always looking for a rational explanation, and it's really plagued some members of my family. Still, I've spent a lot of time trying to figure it out, but it never physically manifested itself to me. To my knowledge, it never physically talked to me either. Other people heard it speak audibly. I didn't. Usually when it spoke audibly, it would speak in a mimicked voice. It would speak in the voice of someone else at the house. Usually my mother's voice, but my mother would hear it use other voices.
Oh, wow.
So it could converse with you. It definitely hurt. You could definitely interact with it. Like at one point, I kind of challenged it. I knew I was doing it, but I said, there's nothing in here. Because if it was, it could turn the lights on, and it turned the lights on.
But it had an intelligence about it.
Yeah, that's one thing. As I've been interviewing my siblings about it, and that's one thing that everyone is clear is that it had intelligence. It was not a force. It was not energy. This was a willful, intelligent creature. I mean, you think about it. It was something that was watching me and creating noise, and I try to think about the physics of it. It's sort of like when I would hear those footsteps. Was there really audible footsteps, or was it something projecting into my mind that wasn't real?
That must have been miserable. Like if you're out and about going to school or work or whatever, like coming home in the evening, I mean, did you just feel a sense of dread?
That is the exact word. During in the immediate post Ouija board incident. Now, I don't think whatever was in there was already in there. You
Hmm.
know, it just empowered it. And this is one.
Well, it could be too. I know a lot of times with the Ouija board, you can open up other things too. So it could have been that something else came through as well, possibly, do you think?
Well, I always viewed this as, and at the time that I became aware of the haunting, I definitely had standard evangelical Christian viewpoint. So I didn't have to be persuaded that it was demonic because the very
Sure.
malevolence of it was,
Hmm.
you could definitely feel it had emotion too. I mean, it was just pure hatred, pure,
Mm.
and so I was aware of that. But so I was under the assumption always that it was just one entity, and that everything else was just a masquerade or a mimic. And but I'm after reading, after finally discussing this with my siblings, my mothers, and my nieces, I am pretty reasonably sure that there's at least there were at least two, possibly three things in there.
Wow.
One,
What was your worst incident? What really sent you
I
over
think,
the edge?
I think climbing out of the window,
Yeah,
you know,
I would say that would be it.
as
Now, wasn't there a time where you tried to get it to leave your room?
oh yeah, yeah, I, through prayer, through the intercession of the Lord, it was prohibited from my room, but I could feel its presence around the room.
Mm.
It was very angry about that, and but I couldn't cast it out. In my book, I say I would sometimes. I guess the evangelical word would be word of knowledge. Was that I couldn't once I said, why
Hmm.
can't I cast it out of the house? And the Lord told me it's not yours to cast out.
Oh, wow.
And then another time, and these are my only two guidances on it from the Lord in a direct sense. And another time was later. It was like, why don't you why don't you cast it out? And the Lord told me, you don't want it to go. You want to write about it. And lo and
Wow.
behold, 20 years later. But
Jeez.
basically, one of the things is there were a lot of people feeling suicidal or having what I would call suicide events. Like me climbing out of those windows, that was not a sad time for me. But if I'd
Hmm.
have been dead out on the patio in the backyard, everyone would have assumed it was suicide. And
Right.
this we didn't talk about it. There were probably three reasons. One was that we didn't talk about it because people would think you're crazy. The second reason we never talked about it is when we did talk about it, it seemed to empower it. There was only a brief period when my sister traveled to England. She met her husband, got married, came back, and she had a very intense experience in the hell room. At which point she discussed that with us, and that's when we all laid our cards down and said this was happening. This was around the same time I climbed out the window. So
Oh, geez.
this was around '86. It was really an intense period, and other people, my mother was telling her incidents. I believe my late sister Laurie was discussing some things. She wasn't at the initial meeting. But we decided not to tell my younger brother, who was probably 11 or 10 or 11 at the
Oh,
time.
yeah.
And I asked my father, and my father was a skeptic. I asked, do you want to come in and discuss this? And he just looked at me like I was crazy. But we only really discussed it during this brief period before my sister moved out and got an apartment with her husband. So after that, we stopped talking about it again. And after I succeeded, with the Lord, I'd say the Lord got it out of my room.
Hmm.
The intensity of the experience, dropped off considerably for me, other than one or two other really intense incidents.
But your mom had are you able to speak on what your mom and your sister like or what the people that have already given testimony in the house, are you able to speak on their
Yeah,
behalf
I mean,
today? Okay.
it's all online. I've been
Okay.
doing
So
like
your mom in your blogs, she had some pretty intense experiences in that hell room. Can you tell me about those?
well, the her experience was actually very much like my sister's. She moved up, and I forgot when she moved up into that room. but she saw a large cat-like creature, but like she would say more like something you would see on an Egyptian thing, like an Egyptian tomb. It was a
Really?
missing cat, and it scared her out of the room. But that closet also had my niece saw the red eyes in the closet, and so did other people. And my sister, that's what drove her out, essentially out of the house, or at least out of those rooms, was she saw something that appeared to be a leopard coming out of the closet in the hell room as well.
Wow.
So it's
Really?
interesting that this, whatever it was that lived in that closet, would manifest itself as a large, vicious cat. This isn't
Do you have any insight into that?
No, and it's because it manifested itself differently. That's why I'm beginning to think it's not the same thing. On the second floor, it tended to manifest itself as either a dark cloud, like kind of like a dark fog, or just a real patch of extreme darkness. Sometimes having eyes, sometimes not having eyes, and then often as a cloaked figure. It was, human-like in appearance, but definitely not human. My niece saw it the cloaked figure. It seemed to have a face once.
She said it did have a face?
It had a face, but it wasn't really necessarily human-looking, I believe.
Well, I'll tell you what. We're running into the end of part 1, and we're going to hang on just a second. And then people can hear about we're going to go on and we're going to talk about what ultimately ended up happening in that house, the culmination of events, and what has happened since, and why you have decided just now to write about it. So everybody watching Signed, Sealed, and Delivered, watch out for part 2.
Farewell.